Next up, the fire alarms might go off again, people. I'm just warning you, because it's time. It's time for Ron McGrath.
Okay, my name is Ron McGrath. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and other co-founder here at HighRoad Solution. First, I want to welcome everyone for taking time out of their busy schedule to attend in person, and also, like I said, virtually online. We really appreciate that. Also want to take a moment to recognize some of the individuals that have put this great event together. So Suzanne is moving around, still working. Want you to stand. Katie, Adam, Katie, stand up. Adam and Liz, we want to go ahead and give them a round of applause. They did a great job in putting this event together. It's very classy. This is the high road, not the low road, so we got to have classy events. And so I'm going to be talking about innovating through automation, or what I like to refer to as automating. I make up words. So it's better than bucketize. Jenny, Brant, you can tweet that, automating. So one of the things that I've learned as I've gotten a little older, a little wiser, is nothing kind of stays in place, nothing stays the same. So you always have to either be growing as an individual personally or as an organization, or you're going to be falling behind. And so one of the key things that you always have to figure out is, how do I innovate? How do I recreate myself? And that's something that's important. A lot of times as individuals, sometimes we fear change, but I've learned to kind of embrace change. Matter of fact, if I get too comfortable for too long of a period of time, I realize that's an indicator that I'm not actually growing and moving in the right direction. So I encourage people to embrace change as an organization here at HighRoad Solution. We are always having to adapt and evolve. There's some huge things changing in the marketing space, and so we're adapting to that ourselves. And so again, we're embracing those things instead of running from them. And as association professionals and marketers, you're always asked to do more with less, right? And so one of the key things about automation is it is going to put you in a position to do that, to actually do more with less. And so, one of the things about automation, and we've been focused on automation for a long time, our core competency is actually automation. We normally started out marketing it as integration. But from the very inception of the company, we've been always about automation. And so obviously it's going to allow you to do more with less, but it's also going to allow you to deliver innovative, creative experience for your members. And so that's what I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So on the front end, some of the things that Rachel had talked about during her presentation, you are going to have to invest more time on the front end. And I think that that's one of the things that actually stops some people or some organizations is there is a time investment on the front end because you have to flush out what the requirements are, and then you have to actually execute on these ideas. And so you do have to invest more time on the front end, but in the long term, there's going to be a huge amount of time savings. And so it really is worth the investment on the front end. With the implementation we did with Rachel, we spent about 4 or 5 weeks, with weekly requirements calls, and then we had a couple weeks to build it out. But now the newsletter, while she was speaking today, gets fired out custom to each individual person to subscribe to it, right? So she's not actually launching newsletters and building out content and those kinds of things in terms of a WYSIWYG. And so again, huge time savings over the long term. And the key thing here is automation takes all kinds of forms. And the key thing about it is you're going to invest the time on the front end, but it's going to free you up from repetitive, mundane tasks, right? And that's what we really want to do for the marketer, is allow you to focus on being more creative. And that's what automation really will do. So what I want to do is kind of start in the day of the life of a marketer, and basically kind of talk about some of the key pieces that you do as a marketer. And the first thing you need to do is basically identify a segment of your audience that you want to market to. And so again, like I said, you guys, our clients, are very familiar with our integrations. And so one of the first things that we talk about with integration to the AMS is the fact that we're going to automate the syncing from the AMS into your HighRoad platform. And so that is an automation, kind of a simple form of automation, but there are clients that don't have that, and they spend days and hours of actually importing segmentation into their accounts to launch emails. And so that is a form of automation. What I've found is clients that have that in place tend to have a lot more segmentation than clients that do not. Because again, if that is completely automated, you can have hundreds of segments versus the amount of pain it's going to take to do these manual imports. And so what I've seen is when you associate pain with a process, you're less likely to do it. And then to the marketer's favorite part, Suzanne especially loves this, is building the content. And so one of the things about building content, digital content, is it's actually not getting easier, it's getting harder, right? So this whole idea of responsive templates, there's just even more opportunities to actually be frustrated, to break your communications. And so this process is actually getting harder over time. And so automation here can be really critical to free you up in terms of time. So one of the things you're going to see here as I walk through this progressively is some of the automation is actually, it's going to start out simple and it's going to build to be more complex. This is actually kind of the ancestor of what we did with Rachel and ASAE. This is where it all kind of started, which was the idea here is you're already building a lot of the content on your website that you're emailing out, or at least we hope you are. Because remember, the whole idea of your digital outbound communication is to drive people through that communication back to your website. So you really don't want to just put content that just lives within your outbound email. You want to have content with read more links that pushes them back to the website. And so in that model, when you're producing content in that way, you're taking time through your CMS, your content management system, to publish that content on your website, and then you're actually going into an email tool and doing the same thing over, but pushing that content into a template. So when we saw that workflow, basically what we did is we looked at, okay, why not hook directly into the content management system through some kind of API or RSS feed, and after you've published all your content online for your website, we actually hook into that, and a tool that we call Newsletter Express, we actually automatically build out your newsletter for you, right? And so that is a great automation tool that can reduce something that would take hours every time you want to send out a communication to something that takes actually minutes. Now, the difference there is you're really building out, it's a publishing tool, and so you're still building out one generic newsletter that goes out to your entire audience. And so some examples of that, this is a UOP, and this is a very complex newsletter. It actually has quite a few sections, but each one of these sections is actually pulling content from a different source system. They actually use 3 different CMSs. And so when they're going to send out their newsletter, again, they publish all their content in their CMS, and they also use an event system for the events on the sidebar. They do that, and they publish it in the CMS, and then they come into Newsletter Express and click a couple buttons, and it actually creates that newsletter finished and polished. So they don't have to worry about breaking the responsive nature of the template, because it's taking the content from the CMS and merging it into a template that's developed for email, right? But again, it's one generic newsletter that's going to the list that it's going to end up to. So you can see this event section on the side. And what we do here is we set some business rules up so that, for example, you might say for certain sections of the newsletter, we only want to have 4 articles versus 10. And so if we see 10 articles in the feed, we'll pull the first 4. These are business rules we can bake into Newsletter Express. And then in terms of the notices, that's how those work, and with the events. And you can prioritize the actual content in the CMS. So there's a lot of options here. But the key thing here is, if you're not doing something like this, I highly recommend it, because this can actually save you a ton of frustration in terms of automation. So leveraging something like this is absolutely a good idea. So now the email goes out, the recipient receives the email, and then obviously any communication you send out has to be CAN spam compliant. So the recipient has to have the ability to opt out. The law states you have 10 days to honor these opt-outs, and this is more generic for the entire audience. Our clients typically have preference pages that are integrated. But again, if this is something that you're still doing manually, this is another automation point that you want to take advantage of. Those opt-outs, when they occur, they should be written back into the source system, the AMS, in real time, so that you're honoring those in real time, and that's really critical. If you're going to go ahead and automate that piece, you should always go with a full-blown email preference page. I was really, the data that Jerry went over earlier with the study from Demand Metric was very interesting, that, you know, a lot of people still do not have email preference centers intact. This is an absolute must. You should always have that, not only for compliance reasons, but you really want to give your audience the ability to tell you what they want and what their preferences are, and then honor those in terms of getting them further engaged. And so you can see here, this is ASAE's preference center. When these preference centers are kind of integrated and you have this automation in place, you can do very complex, advanced things like this preference center flexes. What that means is if I come to it and I'm not a member, the member benefits flex down and they're grayed out, and you can see as a non-member you can't get them. So it encourages them to see, okay, this is content I'm not getting, and hopefully they become a member. And so you can do different things like that. With ADA, they have some business rules intact where if you are actually a leader within their membership, there's certain communications you can't opt out of. And so with automation in place, this is flexing to let this individual know that these communications you can't opt out of unless you call in and remove yourself from a leadership position. So again, these are things that you can obviously today do manually, but with automation in place, it can free your resources up so that these things are done by the actual user. Other applications for automation, obviously the new member emails, and Justine actually went over a lot of great things earlier. One of the things that I had brought up to her when I was talking to her on the side is you guys as associations actually know more about your customer than anyone else, right? Because you have all this information in your AMS of all the things that your members have done with your organization. So you really want to figure out other ways to leverage that so that you can send out more focused outbound communications. But new member emails is absolutely something, if you're not doing today, can be completely automated. And so something you want to take advantage of. The workflow that we see there, or the best use case, is instead of sending a single email, you send a sequence of emails over time that orientates them to the benefits of membership. And that can be extremely powerful. Renewal campaigns, definitely, you know, what we've talked about on a lot of sessions, like 90, 60, 30 days before membership expires, sending those campaigns out. And then more complex drip campaigns. One thing you don't want to forget about, too, is any transactional emails that you're sending out to your audience, you have an opportunity to actually enhance those. And so we've done some work with NYSS CPA, and confirmations they were actually sending over Aptify, they actually send through us. So these are one-off, point-to-point, real-time emails, but now you can see that the presentation is much better. They're responsive. You can see the one on the right is actually responsive, so it's zooming up. And they have a little bit more visibility in terms of what's going on. And so again, automation here is key and something you can absolutely take advantage of. So what Reggie was talking about and what Rachel was talking about is what I call basically persona-based digital communications, right? What you're doing is you're taking information that you already know about an individual and using that to create the content that you're going to send out to them. And that is really where the market is going in terms of automation. So the use cases I showed before are more simplistic examples of automation. This is where you start to put those pieces together. This is actually kind of, the pieces I covered before is what we consider baseline integration. And this is what happens once you have baseline in place, the additional things you can do on top. So for us, this automation integration is not like, it's basically a process. And it's not our finish line. We're always going to be innovating on top of these things that we've built. So with this persona-based digital communications, we're talking a little bit about that. Reggie gave a lot of detail in terms of how they've developed their taxonomy, which is, you know, brilliant in terms of how they've gone about categorizing that. And I want to show you a little bit more about kind of what they brought to us and how we're leveraging that taxonomy with these outbound emails that we send out for them. And so what the initial problem that they brought to us was they felt like they were actually sending out too many emails. And so the initial challenge was they wanted to be able to consolidate 15 different newsletters into a single newsletter. So whenever you're doing any kind of consolidation, the first thing you have to think about are you just going to have a super long newsletter, or are you actually going to make some hard choices and say, okay, well, you know what, we're going to remove some content. And are you going to do that at the detriment of certain segments of your membership not getting it, or more importantly, certain individuals not getting the content they want, right? And that was the challenge that we had to solve. So what we came up with was let's use the individual's interest to drive what they get. So like Reggie said, marketing to an audience of one, right? That's extremely powerful. And that's, you know, kind of the theme that you've been hearing is email, again, blast doesn't have to be a blast. It can be a it can be a one-to-one conversation if you go about executing the technology properly. And so using the interest to actually power the content for each individual person is the idea. So the first thing that we did is the preference center I showed earlier, we added a new section on it that allowed the individual not only to select what communications they wanted from ASAE, but to be specific with this communication, which is Association Now Plus. That is the newsletter that's powered in this way. What frequency at which they want to get it. Do they want to get it weekly, monthly, or quarterly? Now, again, a lot of people come to us when it comes to digital marketing, and they want to add a frequency option. If you don't have automation in place, this is an executional nightmare, right? Because the sender now has a more complex way of sending. But with this, remember, this newsletter is not sent by a human, right? The technology is actually sending it. So we can actually execute on these kinds of features. And so frequency is something that can be exposed here. Underneath the frequency is now the actual taxonomy that Reggie was referring to. So now the individual can specify for within this newsletter, what is the kind of content I'm interested in, right? And so I can say, I'm interested in things under leadership or technology, and this is going to dictate as an individual what I get in my version of the newsletter. So what happens is their newsletter goes out every Tuesday. The integration basically wakes up. It pulls from their AMS, which is Aptify, all the individuals, persons that are supposed to be getting this newsletter. In this case, it depends on what frequency, but it's in total about 20,000 to get it monthly. And it basically starts to iterate through each individual member and says, okay, tell me what Dave Caruso is interested in. And it basically uses Dave's interests to go and pull the content automatically from the CMS, right? One of the things that's important is what ASAE did, and Reggie and team and Debbie did, is every piece of content that flows through the ASAE organization gets tagged with this taxonomy. So we're able to scan their CMS and look for articles that are current and say, give me content that matches Dave Caruso's interests. And we basically put all that into the newsletter. There's a lot of business rules that we bake into this. For example, the order of the sections is actually based on the subtopics. So if Dave chose 5 items under marketing, but 7 under technology, we make technology the lead section, right? Because that subtopic is kind of a voting system of what they're saying that they want. And basically what you can see that we're doing is, within our core platform, which is a strong platform, our email marketing platform is Blue Hornet, there's a lot of features, but features require the marketer to do something, right? And the whole concept about automation is how much of that can we automate for the marketer so they can more likely take advantage of it. And that's where you're going to see the theme in terms of moving to automation, right? So I'm less about features and more about functionality. There's a huge amount of functionality in this newsletter, but not a lot of features that the actual marketer has to take advantage of to send this kind of content. Also, you'll see the lead story here, develop the optimal medical meeting strategy for this particular individual becomes their subject line. So even the subject lines are dynamic based on what are your interests. The bottom half of the actual newsletter, the education is actually events pulled from the AMS, and the publications are products. So basically, again, we're going to the AMS saying, who gets this? And then we go back to the AMS and says, okay, for this individual, tell me what their interests are, right? And then we're going to the CMS, the source system, to get the content. And then we go back to the AMS because some of the content in the actual AMS should be in the newsletter. So they're only going to see events and products that you're marketing that they're going to be interested based on what their interests are, right? And so that you're more likely going to get them engaged. We actually had a meeting with a prospect a couple months ago, and they get this newsletter. And they were, the 3 marketing people were talking to us, and they were super excited about it because they said they get it on Tuesdays, and they wait until Friday to read it. And I asked them, I said, do you realize each copy is different? And they didn't know that. They just knew that they liked the content. And so that's how you can be automated and customized without being creepy, right? They didn't realize we're not saying, hello, we know what you did before. We're just giving them the content that they most enjoy. Whereas member 2's experience is completely different. This is exactly the same issue that went out pretty much the same time, but their experience, the content they get in it is completely dynamic to them. And so again, sending to an audience of 1 is what this is really all about. Now, one of the things about the ASAE application is when it comes to the taxonomy, we're only really taking advantage of 1 branch or 1 dimension of the taxonomy at this point, which is the content type, right? And so every piece of content in the ASAE newsletter is driven by the user. You as the actual recipient, or remember, you dictate what you get in the newsletter. And so again, we actually built this out, we presented it at the Aptify conference, and Rachel saw it, and we talked immediately about her wanting to implement it. But one of the interesting things is when we were going through the requirements, one of the things that Rachel kind of said in the very front end, she's like, there's certain things that we want to tell our audience regardless of what their areas of interest are, whatever their interests are, right? So as an organization, there's certain things that we want to speak to in terms of our audience. And so her application is a little bit different in terms of the business rules. I think most organizations are going to work more like this. And so hers is actually based on 4 dimensions: member type, member segment, which is user defined by Rachel, role, and areas of interest. Okay, so that's the differences in terms of the implementation. So again, Rachel went into a lot of great detail about this. When she's publishing the content in the CMS, she's going to be able to, she's able to dictate who sees what. So when she's publishing the content, she's marking that content up in a way with these category IDs or category items that basically say, okay, CEOs will see this, or people whose membership are expiring will see this, or CPAs that have these areas of interest will see this, right? So there's certain content that's going to go out to the segments of her membership regardless of what their areas of interest are. There's other content that she's going to give them the ability to see if they also have an interest in that particular item. So it gives her a lot of control over the content, and you know, the newsletter is highly, highly dynamic. The other thing that's really cool about this that I like is this is a well-designed newsletter, but if you were manually putting content in, it would be very difficult not to disrupt the HTML and the responsive nature. With this, you've kind of blown up this whole concept of a WYSIWYG because no one's building this newsletter. The technology builds it right every time it sends it out. So it's extremely powerful. And again, what I've seen with these, with ASAE's newsletter, the weekly send used to go to 100 people. It's tripled in size. It's going out to 300 people because they've opted in. You don't normally see that. You see the opposite, lists shrink, so you always got to be pushing new people in them. SFN does the same kind of thing with their alerts, and they get 42% open rates on them. So again, it's extremely powerful. So the next thing that we're going to be looking at, and we were talking a little bit earlier, is I really want to look at an organization, and we'll probably be working with Rachel to figure out how much of their emails, their digital outbound communications, can be completely automated, right? How much can we take away from the marketer where they're manually sending them, where the technology is doing the work for you? Because again, it's going to save you a huge amount of time, but in a manual world, you just can't possibly create this kind of member experience for the individuals, right? This can only be done through automation. The other thing that I'm really interested in doing with one of our client partners is adding a behavioral dimension. So right now, when you think about areas of interest, either with ASAE, I go to their member portal and I express what I want. I can come to their preference page and express what I want. Same thing, Rachel, with yours. You have the member portal, you have that exposed to. One thing about preference page is for every additional question you ask, you're less likely to get the truth. And then also, there's an assumption that the content they're getting, they can correlate to your actual taxonomy, right? So when they're looking at a piece of content, you're assuming that they can associate that to this particular category you have on your preference center, right? Whereas we already kind of know what they like by looking at their behavior, right? And so that would be the next level, is looking at their behavior and letting that tell the story about what they're more interested in, right? Because we capture what they're opening, we capture what they're clicking on, and using that is the way of figuring out what their interests are versus them going to a preference page. Because again, with these preference pages, they're very powerful, but when you have a lot of options on them, the question really becomes is how accurate are they in terms of capturing what the user's interests are. So that is absolutely something that we'll be doing next, and we're super excited about that. There's some features in the platform that allow you to do this. I know there are a lot of clients that are on virtually and here that I wanted to just tell you one thing, because a lot of people don't realize you can use it this way. Within the Blue Hornet platform, obviously you have visibility into opens and clicks, and you can massage that data. But one of the things that's really cool is these segment clickers. Segment clickers allow you to create a behavioral taxonomy pre-launch. So if you're going to send out an email, instead of trying to analyze afterwards what link, how you want to categorize the links, you can do that before you launch. So segment clickers can be easily used so that when you're launching your email, you can say this link, when someone clicks on it, it's interested in technology, whereas this one, they're interested in marketing. So you're creating a behavioral taxonomy, and the system's automatically going to capture when people click on that and categorize them within the platform. That's a feature that's been in the platform a lot. It's underutilized, but it's definitely a way to create a behavioral taxonomy. So that is innovating. Do I have any questions? Are we on time? Either I blew people's minds or they just get completely bored with it. Normally people cry when I show them things like that. Marketing people get emotional. Sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is important. I don't know what the mic is. So I'll just say it out loud. So Rachel asked for the virtual audience. I don't want us to forget about them. There is, how do you test this? Once you build something out like this, how do you test the different use cases? If someone has this in their taxonomy, and I've published this content in the CMS, how do I test the fact they're get the actual newsletter experience I'm expecting? And so for any of these implementations, we give them a testing tool, which allows the tester to be able to say, okay, I want the email to go to me, but I want you to send it as if you were sending it to this individual member. So you're going to get the email, but it's going to look at that member's taxonomy in the AMS. So if it's Personify, it's the master customer ID. Aptify is the ID. Netform is the CST key, right? So again, it's a great tool, and it allows you to test all those use cases. And you still use it, right? Just Yep. Okay, great. Any other questions? I just blew everybody's mind. Okay. Oh, there you go.
What happens if, her newsletter went out this afternoon, but something happened? We have her on Capitol Hill and want that to be.
Yep.
Kind of,
There you go. Yeah, so here's the thing is with Rachel's application, you know what, I'll let Rachel answer the question. Go ahead and give Rachel the mic.
Yeah, it's actually happened. That exact thing basically happened. And so it's scheduled to go out at 10 o'clock every other Thursday, but if I give Ron a little bit of notice, in that particular case, he held it up. I added that new piece of content in, and because it was the newest piece of content that I added, it was the top item. And once I was ready, I just told him to send it. So as long as you catch them in enough time to stop the automated, you're good.
Yeah. And if you catch it before the time, all you have to do is go into the CMS and mark it. See, that's the nice thing is, think of it this way. You're controlling what goes into the newsletter, not by manually doing it, but by what you put in the CMS and how you mark it up. So you could make a change. Let's say you have it and it's going out every Tuesday at 3 p.m. As long as you get that change in by 2:58, it's actually going to show up in the newsletter. Yeah. All right. I think we're good. All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Ron.